onto the maps. What we've done outside of the meetings is actually formed one combined map and really highlighted, hopefully, some of the major loops that are going on. But I'm just going to step you through it in pieces, because if I showed it to you all at once, and this is no disrespect to anybody, it's the same if I was showing it to myself, there's just too much there and it can blow your mind. So I'll just work through it in pieces. And don't get therefore stressed by these kind of half daggly lines hanging off the end. That's me just trying to get this into the story. So the starting point is coronavirus came to Australia. We had stage 3 restrictions come in, and we had a conversation about the rapidly changing situation and messages, which really then influences people's understanding of the messages and rules. And this is kind of really our takeoff point. And this is kind of thought about and has been discussed in 2 ways. This has actually built a lot of community responsibility around community health, like, you know, that whole we're in it together messaging, that it's not just about the individual, it's about not affecting vulnerable people in our community and those kind of things. So we've really kind of ramped up this community responsibility for community health, and that's led to more compliance with the restrictions and advice. At the same time, you know, and particularly, you know, think 8-9 weeks ago, there was a lot of fear around not only spreading the virus, but also contracting the virus. So that's also helped with compliance around the advice. And the big shift then was that to achieve that compliance, we had to reduce our face-to-face contact severely. And that's been in many, you guys know, that's been across the board. And one of the automatic fallouts of reducing face-to-face contact back in March was really that, therefore, reducing face-to-face contact increased social isolation. So that's been the major, one of the first kind of impacts that we discussed, is this impact on social isolation. And I'll just move forward and then pause. So yeah, COVID came. Our first thing was face-to-face contacts reduced, social isolation increased. But what we did pretty damn quickly as a community, and it's been amazing, has actually adapted. And this adaptation has been across service delivery of all different types, as well as activities, whether it's recreational activities and other kind of activities within the community. So as face-to-face contact reduced, we increased our adaptation and addition of services. And that was driven by the face-to-face contact, but it was also driven by this spirit of community spirit, that we're in this together. And so that Aussie spirit and local community spirit of, well, let's look after people in times of trouble. So a lot of adaptations, particularly, you know, I think of, for some of the ones that were discussed, was the teddy bear hunt, Anzac Day Memorial, and how they were celebrated more recently, the Cassidy Bin Art, those kind of activities have all been around some of this community spirit and adaptation as well. So I just wanted to make the point that our adaptations, some of it was very much community-led, some of it was service-led, and not all of it has been virtual, because basically, as we're showing here, is there's 2 types of service provision. There was a big push onto virtual service, but also there was some modified service activity provisions as well. I think the main point in this loop here is that by providing this virtual service, we were enabling virtual participation in services, in school, in work, and in recreation from home, which was a lot about then reducing that social isolation. So in summary, really, we've had this push of reducing face-to-face contact, increasing social isolation, but then our adaptation and the way we've adapted, particularly in a virtual sense, is tried to reduce this social isolation. And I just will remind, like, I'm reading the arrows in the direction where they're heading. So like reduction in face-to-face contact leads to an adaptation and addition of services. And the dotted line means that as face-to-face contact is reduced, adaptation has increased. So the polarity is different. So face-to-face contact increases into the future. You may see a reduction in that adaptation of services. You can read it both ways, if that makes sense.
And I just think, Jeanette, too, it's Jo, that there might be a mistake in the polarity going face-to-face contact to social isolation. We might have made a little boo-boo there.
Yeah, I picked that up. You might have heard me pause, that one isn't right. That needs to be dotted there as well. And the other thing is the blue boxes, which this one here should be blue too, are kind of the actions that we've put in place, and the purple ones are some of our major key impact themes, and the others are other things that are happening out there as well. So that's a piece of the puzzle. I will come back and talk more about the digital access because we did have a deep dive into that. But before we do that, I just also wanted to talk about the other part of this picture that was really important, is that as we had rapid adaptation, it did, when you do things rapidly and adapt rapidly, there is potential to reduce the knowledge about services available. And that's a bit of the speed thing. So that there was more likely to be less knowledge around the services available, which may cause a decrease in access to services. So to counterbalance that though, the group spoke strongly about that if we have collaboration between services, that has actually helped us understand the clear pathways between these ever-changing services. I shouldn't say ever-changing, rapidly changing services, and therefore that's increased our knowledge of the services available. And also we had examples where the collaboration of between the services has also helped with adapting and readapting around what the service is provided as well. That was really important too.
And that collaboration between services could even be, and Nettie, you can probably back me up if this is wrong, but that sort of start of the helping hands was maybe a discussion between WDHS and the Shire in the beginning to say, well, we need to adapt the way we're doing business here. So that collaboration and addition of services is how that sort of came about in my head.
Thanks, Jo. So some of the other stuff I haven't been able to add on the map because you've got to, if I added everything on the map, it would just be too busy. But some of the other conversations that are on the more detailed map around service provision as well is particularly like providing virtual service and activity provision. It's noting that the quality and privacy doesn't, and doing it virtually doesn't suit every example, every health condition, every circumstance, whether people are needing more privacy by doing this in their home, or that whether it's a mental health consult or whatever, and you're not quite seeing the same level of body language and those kind of things in providing a virtual service. So there was discussion around the quality of service. The other important loops that I haven't been able to squeeze in there, but I think it is really important to point out too, is that we also spoke about budget savings in actually delivering virtual services. Can actually, by delivering more virtual service, you can save more budget, which actually helps more adaptation, and therefore that can spin in a very strengthening loop around providing more virtual service provision. And the other important part in that too is, and I struggle with this wording sometimes, is that for some services, providing a virtual service actually provided more anonymity to the client, and so therefore there was less DNAs, do not attend, sorry, around that. So although we talk about quality of service, there's some benefits, some clear benefits in virtual service provision, and some things that we need to consider further. And the other thing that we wanted to put on here that I didn't really have space for really is that acknowledging that there's a whole new cohort requiring help and support. And there is this reluctance to ask for assistance, particularly from this new cohort. And that was important to understand that as well. But there is a lot of activities going on about destigmatising asking for help, and because there's such vast numbers asking, as there's some automatic destigmatising in that as well. So that was important to acknowledge. So with the digital access, like I said, with more virtual participation, is really this virtual participation was really a beneficial thing around decreasing social isolation, and also it connects to other things as well. But this whole thing about this is if you can access virtual participation. And some of the things that were limiting people's ability to access online resources or digital access was things like the reliability of the internet service, the affordability, the access to even devices, which I hadn't contemplated, being a house of many, many devices. Some houses only have one device, and when you've got children trying to school and people trying to work and limited internet access, it becomes an issue. And also for organisations, even being able to use certain platforms has been a limiting factor. And we even heard, particularly with the closure of some of the public community support organisations or libraries and those kind of things, that even public internet access was reduced as well, which then meant that there's even less availability as we went through. So there's many factors impacting on the ability to access online resources, and therefore that impacts on virtual participation. But another really important and interesting thing that also is important is that there was also a whole conversation about the motivation to use virtual and online technology. So you might have access, that might be fine, but you may not be motivated to do that. And some of that was around your skills and confidence and prior use of it, as well as, and it's probably not on the screen, but other distractions in times of crisis as well. And then it took a few weeks, but then there's this emerging conversation around screen fatigue, that actually as we're accessing more things virtually, we're actually losing motivation to actually use virtual online technology, and therefore our virtual participation may be reducing as well. So there was this whole new kind of language and discussion around screen fatigue that was really important too. Okay. Then we had a conversation around the impacts on mental health, physical health, social connection, physical activity. And what I'm really highlighting here is something that's no new information to any of you people about how all of these things are interconnected. And so I won't go over that in great detail. But I think something that we're hearing a lot in these COVID discussions is, yes, health professionals might have known these interconnections a lot, but people are now experiencing these in their day-to-day life. And that's really highlighting these connections more than ever before. So then we spoke about, well, what else is influencing these things? And sugar. So sorry again, I'm just moving the faces. Some of the other things that are impacting on these are, particularly for Indigenous people, we spoke about the importance of that spiritual and cultural fulfilment with connection to people and land. And that's also just, that's for all people, that fulfillment, that we're human beings that need that contact with people. And so we were seeing that the stress and frustration, or the grief from that loss of being able to do that, was having an impact on people's mental health. And that was decreasing people's mental health in particular.
Are a couple of those arrows pointing to that that box on spiritual and cultural fulfillment the wrong way around? I was thinking increased social isolation would be connected with reduced spiritual and cultural fulfillment.
I think you're right, Bruce. I reckon you've
and similarly on the one to the right, going down to increased spiritual and cultural fulfilment would reduce the amount of stress, frustration and grief from loss.
Yeah, I've obviously changed the wording on that box in the middle from a negative to a positive, and I haven't flicked the arrows. So you're exactly right, Bruce. So thank you for that.
Yeah, whereas the one heading to the right to anxiety and depression, I think, is in the right space.
Yeah, awesome. You're getting great at reading these, Bruce. So that gives me confidence. That's good. That's awesome. The other thing, obviously, starting again from the top, is that the fear of contracting the virus and the spread has also led to a lot of an increase in anxiety. So just that whole fear factor, which obviously has an impact on the mental health. And, you know, I don't know if you guys can remember back, but I know there was a few sleepless nights at the start when you're wondering what the hell is going on in the world. We didn't explore this a lot in the meetings, but the economic stress, what's causing those economic stresses, we haven't actually spelt out a lot around these, but we know that they're creating a lot of financial stress, and that's an extra kind of stress that's impacting on people's mental health as well.
I just add, sorry, Jeanette, about the economic stress. I think at one meeting we decided that we might do that outside the meeting, so I tried to link in with some people who might be able to help build a causal loop diagram around that, and didn't have a great response. And I thought, well, maybe that sort of shows that the scope of this group is not around the economic factors particularly. We know that it's a factor that links into our bigger causal loop diagram, but we don't need to unpack everything that's underneath it at this point. We just need to know it's there, basically. Yeah.
Thanks, Jo. Thank you for that. Another important thing that we heard around the restrictions as well is that they were really reducing, particularly people's independence, and particularly for those who are advised to self-isolate or who were already in places like residing in aged care, but not limited to those. And they were confined due to physically confined around physical activity, but also the reduction in independence, therefore meant a reduction in self-esteem that had an impact on people's mental health as well. So we've got a lot of those kind of things impacting on people's mental health, but I think another really important strong message that we heard a lot of in not just these meetings, but actually in other physical activity meetings that we're involved in as well, is that the government's message about 1 in 4 reasons to leave home being exercise was a really important message. And that actually increased a lot of physical activity for people who were able to do that. And, you know, we heard examples of Lake Hamilton or other walking paths being busier than ever. And there might be some tired dogs in the community for being walked more than they've ever walked before. And so this has been a kind of a counteracting to some of this mental health stuff as well, because we know the connection between physical activity and improving our mental health as well. So whilst we've got a lot of things perhaps decreasing mental health, the messaging and the importance of physical activity has been a positive benefit to try and rebalance that a little bit as well. And I'll just be aware that this is going on for a little while, so this is my final kind of slide of the pieces that I might go through now is just some final kind of discussions that we had as well, which I thought is really important to highlight, and it's building on this physical activity thing as well, that particularly for a rural area, there's been so many discussions about the time saved from reduced travel by virtual participation. And people have used that to participate more in things, so that's why it's a type of a circular loop. But also they've used it again for physical activity or improving their physical health in those ways, and physical and mental health in those ways as well. So yeah, that time saved through virtual participation has been a strong story in these discussions. And another one that I alluded to, and we still probably could unpick this a bit more, is this whole competing priorities and distractions in a time of crisis as well. And that was kind of spoken about people not prioritising preventative health appointments at this time, or that they've got, you know, needs to support family or other competing stuff going on, that their participation, whether it's in activities, services, school or work, may be reduced, because that's just a bit of an overload at the moment as well. So in summary, and that's what it looks like altogether, but just some of the summary things is, you know, obviously we had the cases, we've had the restrictions and rules put in, and that's really put changes on our system. A lot of that has been through this lack of, this need for social distancing and lack of face-to-face kind of contact. But to counteract the impacts of that, the community has adapted really, really quickly, and virtual participation in activities and services has been a dominant feature of that. And that has therefore tried to alleviate some of that impact on social isolation caused by the lack of face-to-face stuff. So that's been trying to balance that out to certain degrees. And obviously where there's a digital divide and then people can't access that virtual aspect, that then hasn't been able to balance that out as well. Also, the other, and then just that last conversation around that loop around physical activity supporting mental health, and how some of that messaging and the time saving has helped with that as well. So in summary, there's been lots of impacts moving the system in lots of different ways, but some of our adaptations and learning has been able to try and balance some of those things